We are ecstatic to announce that the Balanced Voice podcast has now surpassed 1 million listeners since our inception in 2020. When we created the podcast in the heart of the pandemic, we had one mission: to have balanced conversations that offer real solutions to the nation's most pressing issues. And at least 1 million of you seem to agree that we've done just that over our past 7 seasons. Thank you to every single one of you that have listened, subscribed, and shared with your friends. We couldn't have reached this momentous milestone without you. Our team got to celebrate this accomplishment at our annual gala last week, and we found it only fitting to welcome a very special guest for this very special occasion. This week on The Balanced Voice, we had the wonderful opportunity to sit down with our gala speaker, Mira Sorvino, just ahead of the big event, to dig a little deeper into her work as a Hollywood actor who has championed change for many years. Mira found herself in the fight against human trafficking many moons ago and has worked tirelessly ever since to bring awareness to the cause and to put an end to such a horrific crime against humanity. This is only part 1 of our time with Mira, so be sure to catch our follow-up episode with Mira Sorvino in 2 weeks on November 1st at 10 a.m. This is the Balanced Voice podcast.
Welcome to the Balanced Voice podcast. We're here at the Hilton Americas getting ready for the Crime Stoppers Gala, and we're so excited. Jennifer Homan and I, who's chairing this fabulous event, have a very special guest today, Mira Sorvino, who is joining us, arrived just today. Welcome, Mira.
Thank you so much.
We're so happy to have you. Okay, I know you came in, you said you're tired, dancing with the stars.
Yes.
We're dying to know, what is it like?
It is intense, man. It is intense because it's like the most showbiz thing I've ever been a part of. It's a real production that kind of involves kind of almost like old Busby Berkeley movie elements to it, live television. I think it only has an 8-second delay in case somebody cusses or something, but it's live,
That's...
and so you have no chance to redo. There are no second takes. It's all, like, the dances are all live. They don't shoot them twice. And you have 6 days to learn them.
And the pressure goes up exponentially.
Yeah, because you have to learn a new, the first dance you had a month to learn. Each subsequent one you only have the next week to learn, which is 6 days between, the show.
1 week.
Yeah.
So
and they're all
practicing.
new styles, right? So even if somebody fancies themselves, I could dance a little, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, no.
Well, I've never danced the cha-cha. I've never danced the rumba. So you learn a new style, like, immediately, and you have to execute it in 6 days with performance quality.
I can't.
And
Wow.
and it's a different thing from acting, although this past week I tried to make it into a scene, which helped me with, I found myself a little bit overwhelmed the first 2 performances with the sort of, oh my gosh, what's happening? This is scary. And I've been a performer my whole life, but not a dance performer. I've danced in movies, but I'm not a trained dancer, So
Did you grow up wanting to dance? Or did
yes,
you...
I grew up taking ballet, but I stopped at 14. So that's in the rearview mirror now. So I've got my daughter is the real dancer in the family. My 18-year-old Matea, she's
children are beautiful,
super. Thank you. She's super committed to dance. She's been doing it since she was like 2. She's in this great dance troupe at Tufts called Saraband, where she also choreographs, and she did all the summer intensives every year with every ballet company, every modern company, Ailey, Joffrey, ABT, Kansas City Ballet, Desmond Richardson's company, Complexions. Like, it's just, her whole life is dance, and as well as scholarship. So
Is she
super
critiquing
excited?
you,
Yeah,
though?
I
Is
was
she
gonna say.
critiquing Mom?
yeah, I mean,
like-
she's been very positive. She's like, you need to work a little bit on your face.
Oh, God.
And
But so Amir, first of all, Tufts, amazing school, New England. My nephew is probably going to Tufts, side note. But, I imagine there's like the rehearsal, but then there's like this getting dressed and figuring out what your costume's going to be.
Well,
and
you have to
then
rehearse
show day.
4 hours a day, but they also film it the entire time. So you're constantly being filmed, and that's a little crazy because you're just always on.
Yeah.
You have no
Yes.
actual moments that are not potentially going to be on the show. And in the end, they use tiny, tiny snippets of those hours and hours of rehearsal footage. But
Do you get to have any influence on what dance you'll do or what
not
the theme
really.
is?
You in the beginning, they ask you questions about your likes and dislikes, important moments in your life, and musical, they have different categories, and like the first night, they were like, what's your favorite kind of get up and dance song? And I was like, Kiss by Prince. And they got it. They got the rights to it, which was amazing because Prince doesn't usually say yes, the estate, to having the music used. And when they knew that
But
it was
they
me,
say
they
yes
said
for
yes.
Mira Sorvino. they say yes for you.
That
They
was
say
very
yes for you.
special, and I was so excited. But the dance style is dictated by the music. So whatever the music is in a dance translation, like, so this week we're doing Cinderella, we're doing the a dream is a wish your heart makes. Yeah. And I was going to say a wish is a dream your heart makes. No, a dream is a wish your heart makes. And that's a waltz. That's a waltz. There's other songs like the Marvin Gaye song is a rumba. Like the music actually dictates what can be danced to it. So it's so interesting, and I never would have known any of this. And it is physically exhausting, but then they also, the costume designer, the creative team kind of designs a plan for the look of the whole piece weeks beforehand.
Okay.
But it depends whether or not you're going to make it to the next week. But they have to plan ahead by a few weeks. And, the color scheme of the background, the color scheme of what your costumes are going to be, and a general style, because Motown was all 60s inspired. So like we had a somewhat 60s hairdo. They wanted red, so, and then we have this incredible costume designer, Daniela Gerstender. She's German. I don't know how to pronounce that correctly, but she's amazing and makes these beautiful outfits, and they custom make them for you. Like past the first week, they are custom building these dresses for you.
They have to fit
and
you
they
perfectly
sort of do
and
hand
work with
couture of all the bling, all the flowers and everything, and it's really amazing work.
I have to say, Mira, it was interesting because we were so excited that you were joining us tonight, and I thought it's so interesting. Like Mira Sorvino, we can talk about your life in film. We can talk about, obviously for our purposes, your work globally. I mean, I don't know many people who have done what you've done. And I said, but we could also ask her if she'd be willing to dance. Like, I mean, who else do we have coming to the Crime Stoppers Gala?
That is so multifaceted.
I know that we could be like,
We're just
could
trying to
we
learn
end
the
the night
Texas
with a
two-step.
rumba?
Yeah,
I learned the Texas
Did you
two-step. I'm
finally?
going to show it to you.
What's been your favorite so far? Your favorite dance so far?
I don't know. It's just my favorite. I mean, I think we did the best on this last one. I liked that, I mean, you like when you feel like you did a good job. But I liked them all. They were all fun.
But you don't get nervous, right?
No, I do.
You
I
do get
That's
nervous.
why, I'm working on that.
Yeah.
I don't get nervous as an actress. I'm not nervous now talking to you. I don't get nervous when I do public speaking. But when I started doing public speaking back in the aughts, I was nervous every time I went up. And I always brought, a fully written speech down to every, every thought, every figure, everything, like very painstakingly labored over. And now that I am more comfortable with the material and more comfortable with the experience of communicating with the audience, I find it's better when I'm extemporaneous because I know my subject. So people like having, feeling like a real person is talking to them rather than somebody's reading something.
Yes. I need to get there one day. Well, okay, so you have this incredible life's work, and your kids, they can comment on your dancing, which I understand your daughter, but let's talk about the work you've done. What do they say? I mean, to have a mom who's been so instrumental in the Me Too movement and Time's Up, who's changed the statute of limitations for rape victims, the work you've done to restructure policy and procedure and governments globally. I mean, what are conversations like that with your kids?
I think that my kids, they sort of, as they grow, they slowly start to learn more about what I'm doing. Like last week, we were in Mexico, and I was there for AIM, Agape International Missions, which is one of my favorite anti-trafficking charities. And I gave a speech there, and I was like, we're bringing the kids. I want them to hear what I'm saying so they understand what mommy does. Like, it's not just they know mommy works in human trafficking, and I kept it PG, but they got to hear from me and understand the scope of the problem and, people who are doing successful work and fighting it in a holistic way. And, I think it's important for them to actually experience a little bit like, oh, this is what mommy really does in her other side of her life, because I have my acting side and my advocacy side or activism side, whichever you want to call it. And they've seen a couple of things at the UN. They've seen a few films I've done on the topics, But some of it's so dark that, like, my little girl couldn't watch the latest film on that topic.
Yes.
And I can't
Yes.
talk about the film because of the SAG strike. But we had to. My husband had to walk her out of the theater because it was going to be too dark. I mean, she's the age, or around the age of some of the.
So you're saying
kids
as they're growing and maturing, the enormity of what you've done is.
Well, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to instill in them an impulse and an instinct towards service, because I felt like I got that from my mom, and I want them to feel committed as they grow and mature to find that which calls out to them and then answer that call, even if it's not the mainstay of their, professional life, that they do something significant as service. I think that's part of our calling is, we're people of faith, but I think just people of ethics, anyone who just, we're members of the human community.
Yes.
We have to give back.
These are human issues.
We have to contribute in some way. And it could be in any way. There's so many different ways in which you can help, but I don't want them to just live this privileged life, which they do live a privileged life. They're, kids of actors, and, they have special experiences. They get to go to film festivals sometimes, or, even though we have some hardships too, because then mommy or daddy has to leave for 3 months.
Yes.
And, it's a weird schedule, but, they do have a privileged life, and I want them to understand that, they have a responsibility to be good human beings in an active way in this world. So I think we have discussions about those things, and, my sons and I have talks about the Me Too stuff, because I'm, look, it's always hard to discuss some of these more sensitive things with your kids, because I get embarrassed talking about sensitive material, right? I'm not great at communicating those things that I should be able to communicate, but I get flustered and whatever. But I think it's so important with the boys to teach the young men to be men of honor and decency, and that a real man is someone who upholds the value and worth and dignity of women, rather than objectifying them, turning them into exploited objects, and to treat them all with respect and honesty and consent. And, you have to have those conversations, because the culture is pushing them in the opposite direction.
Yes.
The culture is pushing them into objectification of women, commodification of women, the sort of changing of, human relatives into something that's very cheap and lurid, and.
Yeah, I have two sons, and we've taught them. We have an organization here that teaches about pornography, which is the root, right, of where all this is going. So, do you speak to them about that, and what age do you think is appropriate, Mira?
Yes, I mean, look, we make it a rule that they cannot look at pornography, even though we're sure they've been exposed to it somehow with their friends or whatever.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, I actually showed my 14-year-old this excellent documentary made by Jennifer Siebel Newsom, the first partner of California, I think it's called The Mask I Wear, but I want to double check that name. It's on YouTube, and it's about men and the way in which the culture has forced men to sort of tamp down their own feelings and their own sensitivity and their own empathy, and adhere to a kind of boys don't cry.
Yeah.
Don't be a sissy, don't be a girl.
Yeah.
And so in sort of shutting off all the things about themselves that are vulnerable or sensitive, then they end up hating those qualities about themselves, and then hating the women who actually are entitled to those culturally,
Right.
like it's a vertical hierarchy that, bros above hoes, whatever, all of that toxic culture that engenders so much sexual violence, so much gender inequity, and it's at the very beginning, it's all narrated at the beginning by this great football player and coach who talks about, his own father, like teaching him how to box when he was a little boy and telling him he could never cry and you have to hide those feelings and you got to toughen up and you got to man up, and and just at what cost that comes.
Yeah.
Not only the cost of that child, of the young man, but all the women that will.
Yes. So it's really, because the only way you're going to stop sexual violence is if you change men, if you change the way they're raised, and the only way that you're going to stop sexual exploitation and human trafficking in terms of sex trafficking is stopping demand, because sex trafficking its terminus is prostitution, its endpoint is prostitution. So people who buy commercial sex create a marketplace for human trafficking.
Yes.
So if there is reduced demand, if men no longer think of it as a victimless crime, as something that is like a right of manhood, a fun pastime, a harmless diversion, if they understand that you'll never know if the person you're with is actually there of their own free will, and that most people in commercial sexual exploitation are there under some degree of force, they are contributing to more people being pushed into that exploitation by pimp traffickers, because as long as people are buying it, they're going to
be sold,
exploit people and sell them, and usually by force. So, but you have to change the culture, you have to change the thinking, and we as mothers have a big job to try and get our sons to see that although that's marketed to you as part of what's on the menu as a man, buying sex, that it really contributes to the devastation, decimation of lives around the globe. Just really, really awful life experiences, lives ruined, lives shut down because of this demand for commercial sex. And the average age of entry into commercial sex in America is 9 to 11 years old.
Thank you to our sponsor, FlipLock, for making this episode possible. FlipLock is a door lock unlike any other lock that was created as a nationwide, straightforward solution to protect your people, whether that be in universities, dorms, daycares, hospitals, or even government buildings. It can be added to nearly any door to keep you and yours safe. We are proud to have such a strong and like-minded sponsor of the Balanced Voice podcast. Check out FlipLock at fliplock.com. That's FLIPLOK.com.
There's a couple things. One is tonight sitting behind our table will be my table is full of a group of what I call survivors and overcomers. And they have become the sisters, the aunts of my two boys. So I believed exposing my children and introducing my children to these women would help me with that conversation. But I want to move that into a conversation about your dad. So my father was a very strong, Rania and I both lost our fathers around the same time, very strong presence in our lives. We watched your father on the screen for so long, and his just amazing presence. What was your relationship, and how did he influence your path?
So my dad was obviously, we'll just answer the second first. So my dad was always an actor from the time I was born, and I grew up watching him act, and I remember thinking it was a very noble undertaking. Like the favorite role he ever portrayed was something in a movie called Dummy, where he played a deaf he was a deaf lawyer based on a real child lawyer named Lowell Myers, who was profoundly deaf from the age of 12 on. And he defended a character played by LeVar Burton, a very young LeVar Burton, who was deaf and mute, who was accused of rape and murder. And he went and worked with kids at the Lexington School for the Deaf for 3 weeks, trying to understand deaf speech, understand what it was like to be a deaf person. And then he actually met the real Lowell Myers, and he realized Lowell Myers had a much deeper voice than he thought, and so he sort of rejiggered the whole way that he portrayed it, and he developed 3 stages of deaf speech because the story happens over time. So when he was closer to the time, he lost his hearing. When he was younger, his speech was better, and as it went on, he lost more of the consonants and everything, and it became more distorted in a way. And it was such a beautiful performance. It was so fantastic. And I was just kind of in awe of him. And I was like, this is noble. Like what he's doing, there's something noble to this art or this artisanship, whichever you want to consider it. And that was when I started thinking I might want to be an actor. And then I started doing school plays, and I loved them so much. And he would coach me on them. He would come to all of them. But, when the other parents would be like, honey, that was fantastic. he would come back and be like, darling, that was wonderful. I just have
some notes.
And then he would sit me down for 2 hours and break down the performance beat by beat by beat by beat. But you know what? Those early sessions were really formative for me, and they really taught me a lot. I mean, they might not have been as palatable as the blanket. You were great, but they were super helpful.
I just can't imagine the life you've lived growing up, and then even now, you've had unbelievable experiences, and you've used them in such powerful ways, and you've paved the way for so many of us to work in this field, to do what we do, to do it safely. And I mean, that is enormous. I know our time with you, we have to wrap it up because we want to respect your time. But I just have to ask, you entered this field well before it was a national hot topic or a national talking point.
Yes.
How?
So I had been looking since college to find some way to get back into activism. I had always been like sort of obsessed with otherism, people treating people as less than human, as objects, or less than just because of the color of their skin or their religion or their gender or, ethnicity. Just being able to make our group is X, you're Y, you're less than us, we can kill you, we can hurt you, we can rape you, we can give you a lower position in society just because our group identification is different from yours, and we have this moral superiority of this sort of higher degree of humanity. And of course that always felt so wrong to me, and I was so struck by genocides in my youth, and in specific the Holocaust. I was obsessed with it as a teenager. And when I got to college, I wrote my thesis on racial conflict in China between Chinese and African students, which was happening while I was over there studying abroad because I was a Chinese studies major. And then when I got out of college, I worked on a documentary on anti-Semitism in the former Soviet Union, basically how Glasnost and Perestroika, the Mikhail Gorbachev's programs, it emboldened hate speech. And they had all these anti-Semitic hate groups sort of rising up because now they had freedom of speech, and now they were threatening to pogromize the whole country again. And it was very frightening and fascinating to try and understand how hate grows, right? So we went over to Russia, did this whole documentary, and fortunately they did not carry out their threats of this pogromizing, but we interviewed a lot of these leaders of these kind of Russophilic anti-Semitic groups. And then my acting career sort of took over, and it took a while to really get it off the ground. It was a lot of work. And then I was in my early 30s, and I was like, I really want to find a way to get re-involved in all of these issues that I was so passionate about. And MC International asked me through Lucia Noyce, who is Philip Noyce's daughter, Philip Noyce's director, if I would come and be a guest speaker at one of their events about the disappeared young women of Juarez in Chihuahua, Mexico. And I said yes. And I gave a speech, and they were like, oh, we really liked how you did that. Would you be interested in coming on as our Stop Violence Against Women campaign spokesperson? And this was in 2004. And at this time, I was pregnant with my first child, and I knew she was going to be a girl. And I was like, okay, this is my chance to get involved in, how can I bring a girl child into the world if I'm being given this opportunity to, have some sort of influence, and I'm going to turn it down. And I've been looking for this chance. So I worked with Amnesty for several years in this campaign. And one of the forms of violence towards women was human trafficking. And I had no idea that slavery was alive and well. It had just gone from legal chattel slavery to illegal, hugely profitable underground slavery in labor and sex. And then I was offered two projects concerning human trafficking. One was a movie and one was a Lifetime miniseries. And I sent both to Amnesty, and we all agreed that the Lifetime one was actually better and more respectable and respectful and non-exploitative and really good. So I made that film, and I think that was the first.
What year was that?
That was 2000. We made it in 2004. It came out in 2005.
Wow.
And it made me struck work, so I can't talk much about it. But I think it was the first major piece of publicly viewed work about the subject. I think there maybe been some documentaries before that, but it had really almost no one talked about it.
Yes.
And then after that, I started getting more involved. I was like, you know what? I interviewed ICE agents to prepare for my role in the project, but now I want to meet survivors. And so I met with these two women in California who had been trafficked in, one from Mexico, the other one from, I think, El Salvador, and one was labor trafficked and one was sex and labor trafficked. And their stories were so horrific, and looking into their eyes, I just saw this kind of excoriated quality, like they had been through something that you can't even understand how bad it is, And I was like, oh, I can't look away. It really galvanized my commitment to fighting this issue. And, I started
It gripped your soul, didn't it?
Yeah, and I spoke in Washington, and I started doing more events, and then the UN took notice, and then UNODC asked me, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, asked me if I'd come on as their Goodwill ambassador dedicated to the theme of human trafficking in 2009, and I said yes, and I've been with them ever since. It's been one of the greatest honors and privileges of my life. I've made 4 features now concerning the topic. I did a very specific documentary called Every Day in Cambodia with the CNN Freedom Project. I narrated a different CNN Freedom Project thing, and I did another thing with ECPAT, which is now called PACT, about child sex trafficking in America. I partner with a ton of different NGOs around the world, in the U.S. and around the world, and I spend a lot of time on it, and it's really fulfilling, and as a weird outcropping of what happened to my career as a result of Harvey Weinstein's, harassment, assault, and then blackmailing of me, I ended up having more time that I don't know if I would have had the time to invest in this theme the way that I have over the past decade and a half had I stayed an A-list movie actress as I was before the blacklisting. So,
well, you're an A-list with us.
You are the ultimate. You are the ultimate.
I have one question. Was there a point in time, Mira, when or did you always know we had a domestic sex trafficking issue? Or was there a point in time where I focused on this internationally, I know it's a problem out there, but then all of a sudden you look at the United States and you're like, oh my God, it's a huge problem here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that happened pretty fast as soon as I learned about the American situation, the first day of learning, but it was like, oh, most of our domestic minor sex trafficking victims are our own kids. Mm-hmm. They're not foreign citizens. They are American kids. We are cannibalizing our own. Yes. And then another interesting thing is, we have a lot of movies out there where you see, the white van scenario, like a stranger danger, somebody kidnapping your kid and take him overseas. Yes. But sadly, usually, more often than not, although that model exists, obviously, but more often than not, it's someone and over 50% of the time, statistically, it's someone in the victim's family who traffics them. So it's family-controlled trafficking, and sometimes it's intergenerational, and that's the same all over the world. All over the world, the family is the number one source of a child being sold into trafficking. They may not traffic them themselves, but a trafficker may buy the kid from the family, and that's just so heartbreaking and so. Topsy-turvy world, like the people that should love and protect you the most are the ones that are exploiting you. But, there's all kinds of vulnerability factors, poverty, lack of education, desperation, that lead to these situations that we need to work on the root causes, not just, my whole thing is that you cannot just work on triage. You cannot just work on the Band-Aid after somebody's been raped for many years. You have to prevent them from being raped in the first place. To begin with. So that requires a big shift in everything we do.
A generational culture shift, actually.
Yeah. We thank you, Mira, so much. You are fascinating, and we're so excited we get to visit with you again in a few hours at the Crime Stoppers Gala. You are incredible in every way, and just I'm listening to even the little sentences.
The big words.
But just even to hear you say, after Weinstein and the blackmail, I mean, it's an unbelievable life that you've lived. It's stuff that we just can't even imagine. You are fascinating, phenomenal. We thank you so much. You're so inspiring. Everybody tune in to the Balanced Voice podcast next week. We're so thrilled that we've had Mira Sorvino. We'll see you all soon. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to today's Balanced Conversation. You can find real solutions and tangible resources in our show notes at thebalancedvoicepodcast.com. To join the conversation, follow us on Instagram at The Balanced Voice Podcast and on Twitter at @BalancedVoice_. Stay up to date on Rania's work by following her at The Rania Report, and we can't wait to see you next week for another Balanced Conversation.